report.
You know, listening to her, it almost sounded like a campaign talk, but I got to tell you something. Those are policies that have been done and accomplished in this state under Greg Abbott's leadership. And so I just want to remind, does anyone here not know who this man next to me is? Raise your hand. So I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I do want to remind you, when we started going to the Capitol, when they started entertaining the idea seriously about property tax reform, and then they said, well, and I knew they were serious this time because for the first time they said, we have to do educational property tax reform as well, because you can't do one without the other, right? We all knew that, at least I did, and I'm not a financial whiz. However, when I went there and I was basically working under Senator Paul Betancourt, Uncle Paul from Houston that we all know. And I heard something crazy because everybody in the legislature, I believe, was talking about putting the cap at 6% when it had been 8%. And yet, in Austin, I heard this rumor that somebody said we shouldn't be looking at 6%. We should set it at 2%. Guess who was that crazy person that said it, and we actually did it with educational finance? That was Governor Greg Abbott. That was him looking to the future, seeing what needed to be done, and trying to lead the way and say, maybe you're not thinking low enough. And they actually were able to pass that. So what I want to say is this is not a campaign event. We are seriously talking policy and what has been done in Texas. And so with that, I am proud and honored to present Governor Greg Abbott.
Thank you all, and thank you all very much. And Robin, I want to thank you for your tireless work as a true fighter in the trenches on so many issues. In Jim, I lost sight of Jim, but Jim, thank you also. And we are particularly excited to have both Genevieve and Grover Norquist with us here tonight. I'm going to talk for a little bit, then Grover will talk a little bit, then we're going to talk up here as a team a whole lot more, and then we'll be doing the question and answer. We got a whole night full of activities. A couple of things about the design of what I'm going to say tonight. I'm going to initially begin by unveiling a new property tax reform proposal. After I get through doing that, I will talk a little bit explaining to you exactly why we are going to keep Texas red in 2022. Part of the reason is because of the stance that Republicans take with regard to property taxes. We want your property taxes to go down. And as Robin was articulating, this is something that I have been working on every single session. Let's go back in time. Go back in time to when I was first running for governor, and I came to talk to the Kingwood Tea Party. And I told the Kingwood Tea Party that if you elect me to be governor, I will cut your property taxes. We have, every session that I've been governor, we have cut your property taxes. Here's something astounding, because I think nobody knows what I'm about to tell you. If you add up all together all the property taxes we have cut during my tenure as governor, we have cut property taxes by more than $18 billion. Those are real tangible results. But listen, I know that as much as we have cut property taxes, I also know that some of you are not feeling it in your pocketbook the way you really deserve to feel it in your pocketbook. And so I'm here tonight to unveil a Taxpayers' Bill of Rights that I'm going to sign in front of you as well as in front of Grover Norquist. And in fact, Grover may sign it too. But this is a Bill of Rights for taxpayers in the state of Texas about issues I'm committed to not just running on, But just like I have delivered property tax cuts and reforms in the past, I intend to deliver on the reforms I'm going to be talking about right now. Just for 1 minute before I talk about the reforms, I want to give a quick refresher for everybody. You know, you talked about we got some newcomers to the state. There may be some newcomers in the room tonight who may not be thoroughly familiar. Did you raise your hand? Where are you from?
Originally from Florida.
Yeah? Good to have you over here. People even moving to Texas from Florida. But listen, here's the point. A simple overview of the way property taxes work in the state of Texas. The state does not impose a property tax. In Texas, property taxes are only imposed at the local level. However, as you've heard from both Genevieve and Robin, Texas does have the legal authority and legal ability to cut, reduce, or alter property taxes at the local level. It's complicated when the state is cutting a tax it doesn't impose, which is one reason why it's a little bit more complicated. That said, on top of the $18 billion we've already cut, I'm here to proclaim for the first time ever the details of my property tax cut proposals. It starts with the things that we have done already that set it up, one of which was articulated by Genevieve, and that is twice we have increased your homestead exemption, which has the effect of lowering your property taxes. Then, in 2019, we used more than $5 billion to reduce your property taxes. Then in 2021, this last session that we had, we used more than $7.5 billion more to reduce your property taxes even more. And I want to show you what the results of those property tax buy-downs have achieved. They are on the chart right over my right shoulder, right back over here. We picked the Humble ISD. First, I should have told you this up front. I know you know it, but just to emphasize, you have different property taxes that you pay. By and large, without a doubt, the largest part of the property taxes that you pay are your independent school district school property taxes. And that's the way that Texas has the authority to move the needle the most. When you look at the two property tax buy-downs that we implemented over the past two sessions, what you see behind me are the results. They are, beginning in 2018, which is before we implemented the property tax buy-down. For the Humble ISD, the M&O stands for Maintenance and Operation, which is the largest part of your school property taxes. The Humble ISD M&O in 2018, before we bought it down, was $1.17 at 1.17 is $1.17 per $100 valuation. Then the year that we implemented the reform, that went down to 106, and then the year after that, 103, and then this year below 1.988. Every single year since we instituted that original property tax reform that Robin was talking about, your property tax rates have gone down every single year. The purpose of my Taxpayer Bill of Rights is to both accelerate that downturn in your property tax rate, make it more permanent, more lasting, and hence make you feel it more in your pocketbook. So the way that my Taxpayer Bill of Rights works is this. The state will devote part of every budget that we pass to deliver both real and lasting school district property tax rate cuts every single year. On top of that, my property tax Bill of Rights also requires local governments to offer you all, the taxpayers, a discount for paying your property taxes early. If you want to pay it early, you have every reason, every right to do so, but if you do so, you should reap the economic benefit from it by getting a reduction in the amount of property taxes you have to pay. Also, however, if you want a different type of flexibility, if you want to pay it quarterly or semi-annually, you should be allowed to do so with no penalty, which is part of my plan. Also, under my Taxpayer Bill of Rights, anyone who buys a home for a price less than the appraised taxable value would get an automatic reduction in the appraised value, lowering the appraised value to the purchase price of your home. My plan also goes beyond just helping homeowners. We know that some of the most important people in the state of Texas are the entrepreneurs that Genevieve was talking about. And many of those entrepreneurs, they run small businesses. And we want to empower our small business owners even more. And so my taxpayer property bill of rights also includes relief for small business owners. They will receive a property tax exemption on up to $100,000 of their business personal property. And then the last part of it is something that we want to do that seeks to address one reason why you have property taxes in the first place. You have property taxes in the first place because you have government wanting to spend more of your money. And we see that especially through these bond packages that are passed by whatever governmental entity that you happen to live in. And we want to hamstring them, handcuff them, limit them in their ability to do that. So here's what my plan does. It limits local governments from increasing local debt that increases property taxes. All debt would require approval not of a majority vote by the governmental body, but instead would require a supermajority of a 2/3 vote of the governing body before they're able to issue a bond that would potentially increase your debt. Sometimes those bond packages go to the voters to vote on. Right. And we want to do two things about that. One, you find that these governments, that they think, well, we have a better chance of getting this thing passed if it's up for election in May because there are fewer people who turn out and vote. We want to eliminate that and try to compel them to either not do it or to have the election in November. And the way that we do that is if it gets a 2/3 vote of the governmental body and is on the ballot, then either it has to be in November, or if it's not in November, if it's in May, it has to receive a 2/3 vote of the public in order to pass. That will reduce your debt increasing. That will limit your property taxes from increasing also. So that's part of my property tax proposal that I'm going to be signing here momentarily. But let me just run through a couple of things that will help you understand why I know for a fact that Republicans are going to win up and down the entire ballot this November. And the reason is very simple. That's because we're going to contrast what Republicans are doing versus what the Democrats are doing and saying. It's never been easier than before because they used to be Democrats. Now they're socialists, and they identify as such. And you know that. And it's not just people like Beto who are socialists. Look at the Harris County District Court system, where you had candidates who ran to be a judge in Harris County, Texas, telling you that they were Democrat socialists, and they are judging like a socialist would judge, which is not following the law. You know, Genevieve was talking earlier about everything that we were doing with regard to jobs. And you left out the best line, maybe on purpose. But because of what we've done economically, Texas has even climbed internationally economically. Before COVID, Texas, if we were our own country, which some people I know want us to return to being our own country. But if we were our own country before COVID, Texas would have had the 10th largest economy in the entire world. As we gather at this Tea Party meeting tonight, that's no longer true, because now Texas has the 9th largest economy in the entire world. And I'll go ahead and give you the line. So here's the deal. The deal is our economy, the country that we passed is Brazil. And so our economy is larger than Brazil. Our economy is larger than our two neighbors, Canada and Mexico. Our economy is larger than Australia. And especially when you see everything going on with the Ukraine, it's important to note that the Texas economy is even larger than the economy of Russia. But this leads to the contrast. The contrast is the positions that these socialists are trying to impose on this country and even in the state of Texas are policies that would destroy that economic promise and kill those jobs. Just take, for example, the Green New Deal that the radical leftists are trying to impose on this country, and radical leftists running for office in Texas are trying to impose here. The Green New Deal would crush the jobs created in the energy sector that provides hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs to Texans, including people around every neighborhood that we are gathered in right now. And we are not going to allow those leftists to crush or eliminate those good-paying jobs. And one of the reasons why I'm running for re-election is to protect energy jobs in the great state of Texas. But it's more than just jobs. It's also things like education. We've seen the leftist radical agenda destroy and decimate education in other states. And unfortunately, we've seen the same type of policies invade our own schools in our own state. That's why this last regular session, as well as during the special session, we passed not one, but two pieces of legislation to crack down on the teaching of critical race theory in our schools in Texas. You need to comprehend the magnitude of what they're trying to do, because the socialists, they want to redesign our country. And so they're trying to rewrite our past and then redesign a future and try to brainwash all these kids about exactly what is being said. And they also use it to actually stoke racism, of all things. They divide people in groups based upon the color of their skin, and then they compel those groups to attack and fight against each other. That's the opposite of what America is all about. In fact, it's the opposite of the man who is celebrated today, of what Martin Luther King said. We are to be judged not by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character. And that's why I'm proud to tell you what we achieved, because what we achieved is the critical race theory that we passed is a ban on critical race theory in every subject, in every grade, in every public school. And Texas now has the strongest ban on critical race theory of any state in the United States of America. Now, in a way, moments ago, I was venturing into another related topic that shows how dangerous these radical leftists are with regard to your very public safety. You know, one of the heavy consequences, one of the deadly consequences that Harris County has seen is this radical bail position they take that releases very dangerous criminals out on bail. In Harris County alone, over the past 2 years, there have been more than 100 people who have been murdered by someone who was let out on easy bail who should have remained behind jail. So one of the things that we passed this last session was bail reform to make sure these dangerous criminals remain behind bars and stop posing a danger to our communities. But it mystifies me when I watch TV and hear all these talking heads on TV, wonder why is it that we're seeing an increase in crime across the country? When it's a no-brainer. Because if you look at every location where crime is increasing across the United States, there's something behind that occurred before that. And what it was this attitude or approach or even governance by cities or counties or even states that wanted to defund their law enforcement. that sends a signal to criminals that they don't have to worry about the consequences anymore. It's one of the most radical, idiotic things I've ever heard of. In Texas, we don't demean or disrespect our law enforcement officers. We support our law enforcement officers in Texas, period. That's why I pushed forward and I got people to campaign with me on the issue where the state of Texas would pass a law that would defund any city that defunds the police. We passed that law. It is now law in the state of Texas. Now, as some of you probably know, there actually was a city in Texas that defunded the police. Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas. And so it won't surprise anybody that last year saw the consequence of Austin, Texas defunding the police. They had the highest murder rate ever, highest number of murders ever in Austin, Texas this past year. But after I signed that law into effect, Austin had to scramble, and they had to come up with more than $100 million to refund the police. They have done it, and now they're funding police officers in Austin the way they are supposed to. But as much as these radical policies endanger us by doing things like defunding the police, I think everybody in this room is going to agree with me that there is actually a greater endangerment to our public safety based upon government policies, and that is with these radical and dangerous open border policies imposed by the Biden administration and supported by people like Beto. Yeah. And so you know the number of people who have come across the border. You know how dangerous they are. And that's exactly why Texas had to respond. But let's go back in time. Think about this actual day. I'm sorry. Still this actual day last year. Donald Trump was still president. Donald Trump had solved the border challenge. He did more than anybody to not only secure the border, but to actually numerically reduce the number of people coming across the border by doing 4 simple things. He imposed the Remain in Mexico policy. He imposed the Title 42 policy that prohibited people from coming across the border because of health care reasons. He ended the idiotic catch and release program, and he built a border wall. Well, all Biden had to do was to carry on what Trump was doing, but he didn't want to do that because what Biden and Beto and all those radical leftists believe in is this open border situation. This is their belief. But Texas has a very different belief. We believe in sovereignty, we believe in safety, we believe in security. And that is exactly why Texas has passed the strongest border security effort of any state in the history of the United States of America. What our state legislature did, they provided $3 billion of Texas taxpayer money to make sure that we were going to have the resources we need to secure the border for just 2 years. We'll do it again in another 2 years. But this $3 billion is going to, among other things, making sure that our law enforcement officers are going to be on the border. We have 10,000 National Guard and more than 1,000 Department of Public Safety officers on the border. And they are securing the border. They're also cracking down on these drug traffickers who are bringing across the border the deadliest drug in the world right now, fentanyl. Texas is cracking down on the importation of fentanyl. For those of you who don't know about it, I'm going to emphasize for a couple of more sentences the importance of you knowing about fentanyl, because I know people who've died from it. There are people in neighborhoods around where we gather tonight who've died from fentanyl. 2 milligrams of fentanyl, smaller than 2 grains of salt, is a deadly dose. Right. Law enforcement in Texas over the past year have seized more fentanyl than is enough to kill every man, woman, and child in Texas, California, Illinois, and Florida combined. This is deadly. It's dangerous. Let me give you another interesting stat. People like to talk about all the deaths we see in different ways. This past year, more people died from fentanyl than from COVID, cancer, or car wrecks. It's deadly, and it must be stopped. Part of it, y'all can stop in your own neighborhoods, perhaps. But our job is to stop it from coming across the border. And that's why we have the resources down there doing it. We also are working to make sure that we crack down on the heinous crime of human trafficking. I signed 15 laws just this last session, cracking down on human trafficking in Texas. And we're doing more than ever before to make sure that we eradicate this abomination of what happens, especially to women and children who are coming across the border. We will not stop until we eradicate human trafficking in the Lone Star State. As important as safety is, candidly, there's another issue that's on the ballot this election that's even more important than safety. It's the most fundamental issue that we have. It's freedom. Freedom itself is on the ballot this election. Our freedom is being threatened. You know what Biden is doing to threaten our freedom. Imagine if you had a governor who was on the side of Biden and what that would do to your freedom. Well, that's exactly what we've seen from the policy positions taken by Beto. Beto, you know, when you think of freedoms, you think of your constitutional amendment rights. Beto is in favor of a law that would eliminate the tax-exempt status of churches that refuse to bow down to the woke radical agenda. That violates the First Amendment, and I will not tolerate it. We cannot allow a law like that to hijack our state. And you all know what comes after the First Amendment. And you know very well where the leftist liberals and where Beto stands on the Second Amendment. And you know what? Ain't no way we will let them come and take your guns. Or ammo. I've signed more than 20 laws protecting your Second Amendment rights, including a law making Texas a constitutional carry state, and a law making Texas a Second Amendment sanctuary state, protecting you from the Biden administration or anybody else trying to come and take your guns. We got more talkers to talk and more talking to do in general, so I'm going to just close this down by making one last point. Is to help you realize the necessity of you getting involved in this election. Because here's the deal. Every person in this room, you believe in freedom. Every person in this room, I know that you believe in your heart, America is the greatest country in the history of this world. And I can tell from earlier comments that some of you may even love Texas more than you love the United States of America. There are people running for office this election who hate America the way that it is, who hate Texas the way that it is. We cannot let them win. We must fight back and win all the way to November, because we are going to work together. And because we are in the right on the positions that we take, we're not only going to win, we're going to give Beto his third strike and eliminate him from politics altogether, and we're going to crush the Democrats. We're going to crush the Democrats, and we're going to keep Texas the best state and the greatest country in the history of the world. God bless you all. Thank you all for being here.
I told him we're going to do it with policy, voting for the people that promote the right policy.
Well, so what I was saying, there's a different, we're going to show people the difference based upon policy. Isn't that what I said? All right. All right. Sure. Listen, I'm honored to have the opportunity to both have with us, but also introduce Grover Norquist. I really don't need to introduce him, but I'll just say this. There is no bigger advocate in the United States for tax policies that really protect people. What I mean by that is he fights every single day. He gets up in the morning, works every single day to make sure that governments will not use tax policies to harm people. He is your pocketbook watchdog, and he holds government officials accountable when they violate his tax policies or what his group believes are the right policies. And we get phone calls from Grover on occasion, making sure we're following the right line on tax policy. And we appreciate his input always. But we appreciate what you're doing here in Texas, and we appreciate what you're doing in America. Taxes would be higher in the United States if it were not for Grover Norquist. So, Grover, thank you for what you do. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Governor Robin and Jim, Genevieve. I'm delighted to be here in Texas. Before I emigrated to the United States, I grew up in Massachusetts. And we always were excited about Texas as a no-income tax state. Texas and 7 other states, or 8 states. Texas is one of them that do not tax personal income. And that's why Texas has done so well. I'm here to tell you good news and challenging news. The good news is there are 10 other states on your heels. There are 10 other states that say, we want that. There are probably 40 states that say we want that, but their legislatures won't let them. So I'm talking about 10 states where the governor and the legislature are seriously moving in this direction. New Hampshire's already passed a law that 4 years from now will make it a completely no-income tax state. Louisiana passed a law that will phase out their income tax completely. Mississippi, North Dakota, and West Virginia, one body and the governor have passed the law that says to phase out to zero. The other body hasn't acted yet. Mississippi just did the House, North Dakota did the House, West Virginia did the Senate, and the governor in each state supports that effort. Arizona and North Carolina have been phasing their income taxes down. Arizona is going down to 2.5%. The law's in place, it's passed. They will take it to 2.5%, and then their goal is to take it to 0 from there. North Carolina's cut their income tax in half in the last 7 years, and they've already passed the law today, a couple days ago, that will phase out their corporate income tax to 0 in the next 6 years, in addition to continuing to take their personal income tax down. South Carolina and Arkansas have governors or governors-elect that are committed to getting rid of the income tax. That's, you only get partial credit for that. They don't yet have the legislative bodies on board. Wisconsin and Iowa will pass legislation this year to phase out their income tax through the legislature. We'll see how the Democrat governor in Wisconsin, they passed a really good tax cut, the Republican legislature, on the assumption the Democrat would veto it so they'd beat him in the next election. The jerk signed it. Okay, wise guy. So this time they're going to phase it to 0, and I don't think he'll go along with them on that one. But this is why what Governor Abbott just outlined is so important to Texas, is to keep ahead of the people who are chasing after what you've already accomplished, and that is reining in spending, particularly local government spending. The local governments like to spend a lot of money and then yell at the state to backfill, please send us the money so we could spend it. And getting them to put limits on how much they can borrow, how much they can spend, how the limits you put on state spending are tremendous, are models. Again, there are a number of states looking to follow this. It may take them a while to catch up with you. But people are learning. 50 states, the others, 50 states competing to provide the best government at the lowest cost. The reason why I have hope that California and New York will one day get better is Texas and Florida, because they will not be able to continue to behave anywhere near the way they behave, treating their taxpayers and small businesses and large businesses and Elon Musk and other personalities with Texas and other states with no personal income tax and keeping taxes and spending lower. So if you like your relatives in some of those other states, the best thing you can do for them is to keep moving Texas forward in the direction that Governor Abbott has been doing. So the annual tax cuts, the spending, focus on spending, very important. There are two competing coalitions in the United States today. One is us, a Leave Us Alone coalition. Who sits around our table? People who vote for our candidates and for our policies, on their vote-moving issue, they all want the same thing. They want to be left alone. For some people, that's their faith, transmitting their faith to their children. Leave me alone. They're not asking for Baptist stamps. They simply wish to be left alone. The Second Amendment community, which includes knives. Please remember knives. Never forget the knives. The Second Amendment community says, please leave us alone. They don't knock on your door on Saturday and ask you to go hunting, okay, or tell you should go hunting. They don't require your children in public school to read books. Heather has two hunters. They simply ask to be left alone. The homeschooling community, again, right? I mean, they don't badger you to homeschool. They want to homeschool. They'll be free to homeschool. They may give you a sales pitch. This works. But they don't go around asking the government to make you do this. Small businessmen and women who simply wish to be left alone, independent contractors who don't want to have that taken away from them, which is on the Democrats' cutting list. But all of the groups who simply wish to be left alone, the candidate in the middle has to go, I'm going to leave your kids alone, I'm going to leave your guns alone, I'm going to leave your faith alone, I'm going to leave your business alone, your property alone, your 401k, your IRA, your income, I'm going to leave you alone, okay? And we don't have to all agree on everything, okay? The guy who wants to go to church all day looks across the guy who wants to make money all day and says, that's not how I spend my time. And they both look over at the guy who fondles his guns all day and say, well, that's not what I do. But it's not necessary that we agree what we do with our liberty, but that we agree everybody else should be free, and we get to choose a religion where we go to heaven, everybody else gets to choose a religion where they don't, and that's up to them. But again, we don't have to agree other than on the concept of a constitutional guarantee of our liberties. Now, there is another coalition, the Takings Coalition. These are the people who sit around a table and they think the proper role of government is taking things from some people and giving it to other people. Frequently money and frequently them. So who sits at their table? Actually, Hillary Clinton was in upstate New York, and she said what progressives, because they'd driven liberal into the ground, okay? And before liberal, it used to be progressive in the 40s. That got associated with Stalinism, so they had to sort of drop that and go to liberalism. Then liberalism became welfare, so they moved back to progressive again. We'll see when they decide to get rid of progressive this time, maybe after the next election. But Hillary was doing that listening tour in upstate New York, because if she talked too much, she'd have never gotten a vote. So she was listening. And the press guy says, and she said to one of the press people that what progressives need is one of those meetings like Grover runs. We have a meeting with about 100 people in D.C. every Wednesday, and it's the Leave Us Alone Coalition in 44 states. There's a meeting in Austin. 44 states have similar meetings, and she said, we need meetings like that. And the press asked me, what do you think of that? And I said, well, I explained our coalition, how it works together. We all want to be left alone. We're not in conflict with each other on primary vote-moving issues. Who would sit at Hillary's table? Trial lawyers, labor union bosses, big city political machines, the two wings of the welfare department, the welfare movement, people who are locked into welfare dependency and the people who make $100,000 a year, managing their dependency, making sure they don't get jobs and become Republicans. And then you have all the coercive utopians. These are the people who are smarter and better than you and I are, and they know how to run our lives better than we do and what our children really need better than we do. And so they're quite willing to make the sacrifice to tell us what to do and hire the government to make us do it. These are the people who invented the toilets that don't completely flush. and the light bulbs that convince you have glaucoma. And they organize it on the Sabbath. You have to separate the green glass from the white glass from the brown glass for the recycling priests. And they have a list of things that you have to do and a list of things you're not allowed to do that is slightly longer and more tedious than Leviticus. And the governments get, you use that line in Massachusetts, people go, Leviticus? Anyway. But it's right next to I Corinthians. But those are our friends on the left. That's the Takings Coalition. Here's the challenge they have, okay? Unlike us, they're not friends and allies, okay? Our job, governor's job, is to not let them raise taxes, because if we throw money at the center of the table, all the guys on, like the $2 trillion that as soon as Biden showed up, he threw $2 trillion on the front of the table, and then the left can get together, like that scene in the movie after the bank robbery. One for you, one for you, one for you. Everybody's very happy, okay? But after a while, when they start, the money's $2 trillion is dwindling down. Now, you and I think that's still a lot of money, but they look like the Kennedy kids surrounding a table. There's like one six-pack in the middle of the table, and they're dying. So you've got this, what do you do? And our job, as long as we say no new taxes and mean it and hold it, okay, and we don't let them have more money to spend, then they begin to look at each other a little bit more like the second to the last scene in the Lifeboat movie. Who do we throw overboard or who do we eat? And if we don't feed them taxpayers, they will cheerfully gnaw on the guy sitting next to them. Because around the left's table, the Takings Coalition table, they're not friends and allies, they're competing parasites. And our job is to not feed them taxpayers. So as we do that, that's why my group, Americans for Tax Reform, shares the taxpayer protection pledge with all elected officials. And tonight, with your signature, there'll be 15 governors who've signed the pledge, about 90% of the Republicans in the House and Senate, almost everybody in Texas in the House. Senators, yes, almost all the House guys have. And that's allowed us to stop tax increases since 90, when Bush unfortunately broke his pledge and raised taxes, and then threw away a perfectly good presidency, after a very successful presidency, except for the one hole in the bottom of the boat from the tax increase. That's when all the other Republicans learned, take the pledge, as Bush did. He beat Dole. Dole wouldn't take the pledge. Take the pledge, win the primary. Take the pledge, read my lips. He was 14 points down when he said read my lips at that convention. We were losing to Mike Dukakis. That's a frightening thought. But then he re-upped. We're never raising your taxes. He beat Dukakis. Keep the pledge, get reelected. And since then, I have this wonderful chart which explains most of the world. And that is, if you see the blue in top and bottom, that's the House and the Senate. From 1932 to 1994, 62 years. There are only 4 years the Republicans had the House and Senate. 2 years under Eisenhower, 2 years under Truman. So 4 years out of 62. The PRI in Mexico never had a run that long with that level of one-party control that the Democrats had in Congress. In 94, when 95% of all the Republicans in the House and Senate signed the pledge and kept it, we have had the House and the Senate, Republicans have had the House and the Senate for 60% of the time. Not 1 out of 15 years, but more than half. That's why the Democrats are so grumpy, because they cannot and have never lived in a world where they couldn't think, well, Nixon got elected, we'll wait him out, because we still have the House and the Senate, and we'll do what we want to. And if we can't get everybody to agree this time, we'll come back 2 years from now and give somebody a bridge, and then we'll pass our stupid law. But now, with the Republicans having the House and Senate more than half the time, they can't govern that way. They can't backfill the challenges. So by becoming the party that would never raise your taxes, we may invade small countries we can't pronounce, but we will never raise your taxes, and that's good for 60% of the time. And if we could avoid invading countries you can't pronounce, we could get maybe up from 60. But anyway, that's where we're going. That's where Texas is moving faster and forward, ahead of other I'm just reminding you. The other states, wait a minute, what's going on? They figured out what you're doing. They're up to you. They're on to you. Some of them are incapable of moving until everything around them, sinks. So California will get worse and worse before they get better. But it's like a fever or something, right? You need to go through this. The pain's yours, but they will get through this. They will catch up with the rest of the kids later. So that said, I am delighted to be here, Governor. Someday we'll have 50 Abbotts as governor in 50 states. While we're not there, your leadership and what you've accomplished in Texas, getting some control over spending as well as keeping taxes down and annual tax cuts, that's the model that keeps pushing forward the other 8 states, the 7 states that have no income tax now but are cutting other taxes, the 10 states that have actually said it is our policy to go to zero. It may take them longer than they think. It's not easy, but they're all on track and they're all deadly serious about it. And then the rest of them are all sort of watching to see how this goes. We know how this play ends. This play ends with them figuring out they have to play catch up too. With that said, we can do the pledge here?
Yes.
Okay. This is a public written commitment to the citizens of Texas that the governor will oppose and veto any and all efforts to increase taxes. Fairly simple.
The state of Texas.
I never knew there was a Texas state pledge. So now I do. We don't even have a flag in Massachusetts.
Well, I don't know anymore, but we always said it in school. Yeah. Every day. So we still say every day. Is it still? Thank you. Good to know. There we go.
There you go.
And I'm close enough. He wrote his name, Greg Abbott. It was not an alias.
Thank you. Good words. This is so cool.
Governor Abbott,
Thank you, Robert.
for leading Texas.
I could listen to you for another hour. Oh, that's wonderful. So exciting.
We got some real progress.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. We have a typo on my agenda, and I'm just confused. Did you see that?
I haven't looked at the agenda.
Well, she came at 7:17 giving remarks, but now I'm supposed to invite her up to the stage.
Who's that?
Genevieve.
Oh.
So we're going to begin question and answers with Grover, Governor Greg Abbott, and Genevieve Collins. So I think you have remarks made. The questions are, I think, coming from the board here.
Are they coming from where? Well, I have a policy question that I think, Governor, you
do
can
it.
tee off while we have folks come in with questions. You know, we've seen the Biden administration try to pass $6 trillion worth of spending last year, and in the same time, the Texas legislature passed a fiscally responsible budget as well as tying inflation and population growth. Can you talk to the audience a little bit about how Texas is leading the way and changing the tune from reckless spending to actually responsible budgeting?
So we did what you could only dream that you would ever see happen in Washington, D.C. We passed a balanced budget with absolutely no new taxes whatsoever. maybe more importantly, we put into law something that we've been committed to do every session, but we actually wrote into law an actual spending limit that ties the hands of future legislatures to make sure they cannot exceed any particular increase in spending in future state legislatures. One thing I will add, because I just need to show Grover we're trying to stay a step ahead of all those other states. So everybody here knows that we don't have an income tax in Texas, but we wanted to be more solid. Candidly, what we're doing, we're looking at future generations. And we want to make sure that future generations are going to inherit the same Texas we did. So what we did 2 sessions ago, we passed a constitutional amendment banning an income tax in Texas. It would take 2/3 vote to ever have an income tax in Texas now.
Just so you know, Florida also went and passed a 2/3 requirement to ever put in a state income tax, but they said 2/3 of those voting that day, which means 100 people vote, 10% of them do president and go home. So you now have 90 votes for yes income tax. You need 67 of 90. So they've actually got a higher requirement because they miswrote their bill, their initiative.
Something to go back and consider.
Yeah, that's right.
You know,
I just want to add that I believe in Texas, we have also on our side Texas Public Policy Foundation, who work very closely with the legislature and our legislators. And they also write all of the pros and cons of all of the arguments showing why conservative answers are the better answers for them to support. This is a lot of them also went to D.C. and worked with President Trump when he was there. And I saw some of the policies I knew they were working on for the state of Texas become, unfortunately, executive orders up there or were actually passed. And I believe that that's one of Texas's secret weapons, is to have that close relationship. And the reason I want you to remember Texas Public Policy Foundation is because we always need citizen input to help make those points with those legislators. And they are a good group to go to because they organize on the issues that you can go and help us get the legislators to do what Texas needs them to do.
Yeah, hey, we've got a friend here who for many years was the conservative professor at the University of Houston. Good friend of ours now running for treasurer of Harris County, Kyle Scott. And he's got a question for the panel.
Sure. So, as you may be aware, there are a few other proposals as well about reducing our taxes. What is it about your policy that will make it both more realistic and more effective in its implementation?
One is the word realistic that you used. Anytime you pursue a tax policy, it has to be mathematically achievable and realistic. This one is what we've proven by what we've passed in the past. These numbers on this chart back here show how the tax rate goes down. Our goal, and that's a 15% tax rate reduction in 3 years. If we continue this 15% every 3 years, by God, your taxes are going to continue to go down. This is effective, it is realistic, it is achievable, and it is tangible relief for Texans who have to pay property taxes.
We have a challenge because the left is always suggesting that we should compromise. And by compromise, they mean lose, okay? And give up. So I'm in favor of compromise properly understood. I'm willing to move